13,000 high-profile romances. The press praised him for it, but that crazy number was actually just a sickening cover for an abuser. Behind that famous romantic smile, this movie legend used strict contracts to completely control his co-workers' entire lives. Even more disgusting, this powerful Hollywood icon was formally accused of using his massive fame to assault a highly vulnerable newcomer. The whole illusion is collapsing today, exposing all of his brutal and filthy methods of manipulation. So let's get right into exactly what happened behind closed doors before we even open the door to that Beverly Wilshire hotel room. We have to talk about the massive PR machine that protected Warren Beatty for decades. The American press actively protected his image. We need to look at the main talking point the media loved to push back then. 13,000 women, gossip columnists, late-night television hosts, and industry insiders treated this specific number like it was the ultimate cinematic achievement. Let's actually break down the math right now. To hit 13,000 partners, a guy would have to bring a new person home every single day for over 35 years. That is not a romantic lifestyle. That is a severe, calculated compulsion. If anyone operated with that kind of relentless schedule today, the public would immediately call it out as highly predatory behavior. We would recognize it as a massive psychological red flag. The American entertainment industry in the 1970s, however, completely normalized it. The studios basically ran on this toxic playboy culture. The media actively told the public that exploiting women was just a normal part of being a successful leading man. The press handed Warren Beatty a free pass to do whatever he wanted, creating a massive narrative where taking advantage of vulnerable partners was considered a huge career victory. We know exactly how he treated these partners, because some of them actually spoke out about the abuse. Take Joan Collins, for example. At the time, the magazines painted their relationship as this perfect, glamorous Hollywood love story. The paparazzi followed them everywhere, and the public bought into the fake image. Joan Collins eventually revealed that dating Warren Beatty was an absolute nightmare. It had absolutely nothing to do with mutual respect or building a life together. Joan stated clearly that the entire relationship was just about total control. Joan detailed how Warren demanded physical intimacy 3 to 4 times a day, every single day. We need to analyze what that actually means in a real relationship. That is not a guy simply being passionate. That is a deliberate, exhausting tactic. Warren used constant physical demands to completely drain Joan Collins of her energy. He did this so Joan would be too tired to focus on her own acting career, her own friends, or her own independent life. We are talking about a working actress who needed to learn lines and show up on set. Warren forced her to change her entire daily routine, her sleep schedule, and her lifestyle, just to serve his relentless needs. It is a classic isolation strategy. He made sure her entire world revolved around keeping him satisfied. Joan actually delivered a statement that completely destroys his charming gentleman reputation. Dealing with Warren made her feel completely used and utterly worthless. Think about the brutal reality of that dynamic. He did not look at her as a human being with boundaries or exhaustion. He looked at her as a disposable object built just to serve him until he got bored and walked away. He took exactly what he wanted and felt zero empathy for the pain he caused her. By treating her this way, Beatty systematically stripped away her humanity, reducing a talented co-star to a tool for physical gratification. There was no emotional connection. It was a purely transactional system designed to break her down and keep her submissive. This was not just a bad breakup with one specific actress. This was his standard operating procedure for decades. Author Peter Biskind spent years researching the dark, hidden side of the movie business, and his findings totally ruin the Warren Beatty myth. Biskind interviewed insiders and looked at the raw facts. He pointed out that Warren did not actually respect his partners at all. According to the research, Warren viewed his female partners with the exact same emotional detachment you might have for a disposable object waiting to be used. Think about how cold that reality is. You do not care about the feelings of a tool. You simply use it to satisfy a temporary need, and then cast it aside until you want it again. That was Warren Beatty's entire approach to human beings. He would pick up talented women, keep them on standby, and only interact with them when it was convenient for his schedule. All of that famous Hollywood charm, the intense eye contact, and those deep conversations about art were just calculated tools. Warren used a fake intellectual persona just to get what he wanted. Once the door was closed and the goal was achieved, the empathy completely disappeared. He turned physical relationships into a pure power trip. He wanted subordinates, not equal partners. The psychology behind this behavior is actually really pathetic. Author Ellis Amburn dug into Warren's background and found that chasing 13,000 partners was never about being a great lover. It was actually about hiding a massive flaw. Amburn claims Warren suffered from a chronic, deep-seated psychological issue. All of these endless hookups were just a desperate cover-up. Warren was dealing with extreme vanity and massive, crushing boredom. He was a Hollywood star terrified of aging. He knew his physical looks were his only real currency in the industry. As he got older, he panicked. Warren used these conquests as a way to prove his dominance and make himself feel important. He needed to conquer women to convince himself he was still the king of Hollywood. The thousands of affairs were just a desperate attempt to hide his massive, unhealable insecurities. Warren needed constant validation because, underneath the expensive suits and the famous hair, he was just an empty guy using other people to feel alive. He drained the energy out of young actresses just to feed his own fragile ego. The whole Playboy lifestyle was a total scam. It was just a defense mechanism for a guy who was terrified of becoming irrelevant. The most infuriating part of this entire situation is how the American media totally backed him up. Studio executives, talent agents, and PR teams cared way more about movie ticket sales than the safety of the women working in their industry. Everyone in Hollywood knew exactly what Warren was doing. The rumors were everywhere. People talked about it at private parties. Instead of calling him out or stopping the behavior, publicists actively framed his controlling tactics as just quirky Playboy charm. They hired fixers to keep the worst stories out of the newspapers. They sold the public a toxic lie. The media pushed the narrative that a man's worth is tied directly to his number of conquests. They also pushed the idea that a woman should be proud just to be a brief footnote in a famous actor's life. They turned a serial manipulator into a cultural idol. Because the press protected him so aggressively, Warren Beatty got even bolder. He knew the magazines would always take his side. He knew the male journalists wanted to be his friend. The system was rigged. The entire American entertainment machine was built to protect powerful men and silence the women they exploited. The 1970s sexual revolution was supposed to be about freedom, but Warren just weaponized it. If a woman refused his advances, he would just call her a prude or say she wasn't liberated enough for Hollywood. He used the culture against them. When people talk about the history of Hollywood, they are usually talking about an era where guys like Warren Beatty could ruin lives without any consequences. The 13,000 number is not a romantic legacy. It is a massive list of victims. It represents decades of unchecked manipulation, psychological abuse, and absolute power. This absolute power did not just stay in his public PR life, it bled directly into his professional life and giving him the confidence to set up an even darker, more twisted system right in the middle of Beverly Hills. We just established how this Hollywood machine operated when dealing with adult professionals. But the reality gets exponentially darker when you examine the actual legal documents filed against him. We have to shift our focus completely away from the glamorous magazine covers and look directly at the lawsuit filed by Christina Charlotte Hirsch. This specific legal case strips away every single excuse his public relations team ever invented. According to the court filings, Christina came forward to document a nightmare that allegedly occurred when she was merely a highly vulnerable, inexperienced newcomer. We are not talking about a consenting adult navigating a bad career choice. We are talking about a massive, untouchable American cinema icon, specifically targeting a defenseless beginner. Let us break down the exact power dynamic in that room because it is mathematically sickening. On one side, you have Warren Beatty. He is not just a famous actor at this stage in his career. He is a producer, a director, and one of the most connected, wealthy men in the entire entertainment industry. He has millions of dollars, a team of ruthless corporate lawyers, and the absolute backing of major film studios. On the other side of the door, you have a vulnerable newcomer. This is an individual who does not possess the life experience, the legal knowledge, the financial independence, or the emotional defense required to fight off a veteran abuser. It is a complete and total mismatch. Warren Beatty knew exactly what he was doing. He knew that targeting someone so young in the industry meant he would face zero resistance and zero consequences. The lawsuit details exactly how he allegedly weaponized his Hollywood status to trap his victims. He did not just attack out of nowhere in a dark alley. He used the industry itself as the trap. The filings claim he used his supreme position to force physical contact, starting with a very calculated excuse of acting exercises. He would frame these isolated interactions as professional screen tests or deep character studies. This is the ultimate cold-blooded manipulation. He took the respected concept of method acting and twisted it into a direct tool for sexual assault. He convinced the newcomer that in order to be a real actress, in order to survive in the competitive movie business, they had to prove they were brave enough to execute these extreme, unscripted physical scenes behind closed doors. He started the process by forcing simulated physical contact under the guise of an audition. And then the lawsuit alleges it escalated directly into actual real assault. This is a very precise, calculated progression. A predator uses these fake acting exercises to systematically break down the physical boundaries of a beginner. First, it is just a touch meant for a scene. Then it is an intimate demand meant for a character. By framing the abuse as necessary professional artistic work, he makes the victim feel like they absolutely cannot say no without instantly ruining their entire future career. He weaponized their own ambition and their dreams against them. If you refuse the famous director, you lose the part and you get blacklisted. When you are a highly vulnerable newcomer, that kind of intense industry pressure is completely paralyzing. We have to analyze the psychological response to this kind of extreme pressure because the public always asks why victims do not just run away or scream for help. When a massive, legendary Hollywood star traps a beginner in a private hotel room, the natural human biological response is to freeze. The brain completely short-circuits out of pure terror. You are standing in front of a guy whose face is literally on every movie poster in the country. He is telling you that this is just how the movie business works. He is telling you that every great famous actress goes through this exact same process. For a vulnerable newcomer, it is impossible to quickly process that the biggest star in the world is actually committing a violent crime right in front of them. They just freeze in place, hoping the nightmare will end quickly. Warren Beatty banked entirely on that biological freeze response. He depended on the absolute fact that his targets would be too terrified, too confused, and too starstruck to fight back. The sheer arrogance of executing this plan is mind-blowing. He felt completely untouchable. The worst part is that the Hollywood system actually made him untouchable. We have to look at the strict hierarchy of the entertainment industry during the 1970s. The studios operated on a brutal, unforgiving class system. At the very top, you had the A-list stars and directors who brought in the millions of dollars in box office revenue. At the very bottom, you had the disposable beginners. The executives sitting at the top of the studios handed guys like Warren Beatty a literal free pass to do whatever they wanted. They gave him complete, unquestioned immunity from the law and from basic human decency. This immunity meant he could turn his hotel suite at the Beverly Wilshire into a highly controlled private area. He did not have to hide his actions. He operated right out in the open in one of the most famous, heavily staffed hotels in Beverly Hills. He used his penthouse as a fake casting office. When he told a young newcomer to come to his hotel room late at night for a private audition, the industry did not flag it as a massive problem. Talent agents, talent managers, and hotel staff knew exactly who was going up to that room. They literally saw vulnerable beginners walking into the elevator late at night. They all knew Warren Beatty's dark reputation. Nobody said a single word. They all prioritized their own paychecks, their own industry connections, and their relationship with a famous movie star over the basic physical safety of those beginners. This silent, industry-wide complicity is exactly what makes the Christina Charlotte Hirsch lawsuit so incredibly important today. It exposes the entire network of enablers. An abuser absolutely cannot operate at this high level for this long without a massive group of people covering for him. The hotel staff who looked away, the publicists who spun his image as a harmless romantic, the journalists who took exclusive interviews instead of investigating the dark rumors circulating town. They are all part of the exact same crime. They helped build the trap. They actively allowed a grown man to systematically destroy the life of a highly vulnerable newcomer just to keep the movie machine running smoothly and the money flowing. Let us dig deeper into the absolute cruelty of his specific method. When you assault a vulnerable beginner, you are not just hurting them in that specific terrible moment. You are completely destroying their fundamental understanding of trust, authority, and safety forever. You are altering the entire trajectory of their life before it even really begins. Warren Beatty used his famous charm and his fake intellectualism to manipulate his targets over time. He would talk for hours, acting like a caring mentor. He would make the newcomer feel incredibly special, like they were the only person in the world who truly understood his artistic genius. This is a textbook manipulation technique used by abusers everywhere. He built a false sense of trust and intimacy, making the eventual physical assault infinitely more confusing and traumatic for the victim to process. The victim is then left dealing with the horrifying aftermath completely alone and isolated. If a vulnerable newcomer tries to speak out against Warren Beatty in the 1970s, who is actually going to listen to them? The police are not going to storm the Beverly Wilshire Hotel to arrest a major celebrity based on the word of an unknown beginner. The major newspapers are not going to print a story ruining the reputation of their biggest cash cow. The victim knows deep down that speaking up will just result in them getting blacklisted from the entire industry, labeled as a crazy liar, and dragged through the mud by expensive corporate lawyers. The severe power dynamic guarantees absolute terrifying silence. The abuser gets to wake up the next day, put on a tailored suit, and go to a glamorous movie premiere with flashing cameras, while the victim is left carrying a heavy lifetime of invisible trauma. This legal case completely destroys the illusion of a romantic Hollywood era. People love to look back at the movies from that specific decade and talk endlessly about the groundbreaking art and the brilliant directors. We can no longer separate the art from the absolute monsters who made it. We have to reevaluate every single movie he ever made, knowing as a fact that the man behind the camera was actively using his immense power to prey on highly vulnerable beginners. The industry rewarded him with Academy Awards, standing ovations, and millions of dollars, while actively burying the people he destroyed behind the scenes. The disturbing details of the Hirsch lawsuit force us to confront an incredibly ugly truth about American pop culture. Society gave way too much power to people who did not deserve a single ounce of it. We allowed the concept of celebrity to completely override basic human decency and the actual law. Warren Beatty used his extreme fame as a literal shield. He knew the public loved him too much to believe the dark rumors. He weaponized his own massive popularity against his victims. He knew that as long as he kept making hit movies, the studio executives would keep writing the checks and the press would keep praising him. He traded on his charm to commit acts of extreme cruelty against defenseless beginners, knowing full well that the entire Hollywood system was rigged heavily in his favor. Looking at the cold facts of this lawsuit, the entire legacy of Warren Beatty collapses into nothing. You cannot be a legendary gentleman and a ruthless predator at the exact same time. The two concepts cannot exist in the same person. The media spent decades trying to convince the American public that his behavior was just a sign of a passionate, artistic soul. There is absolutely nothing passionate or artistic about using your massive wealth, your age, and your industry influence to corner a highly vulnerable newcomer in a hotel room and force yourself on them. It is just raw, ugly violence deliberately disguised as standard Hollywood business. The lawsuit brings all of that darkness out into the light, forcing the industry to finally look at the monster they created and protected for over 50 years. That same unchecked dominance we just analyzed in the hotel suites eventually infected the actual movie sets. Warren Beatty did not keep the manipulation confined to late-night private meetings. The leading man dragged that exact same toxic control freak behavior right out into the open on the sound stages. The American film industry loves to glorify the concept of the visionary director, but what happened on the set of the historical epic Reds was not visionary art. It was a straight-up dictatorship. To pull off a dictatorship in Hollywood, a person has to systematically eliminate anyone who has the authority to say no. The studio system usually relies on producers and executives to keep an eye on the budget and police a director's behavior on set. Warren Beatty completely hijacked that entire system. On the set of Reds, the actor refused to just play the main character. The Hollywood star made himself the lead actor, the primary writer, the lead producer, and the director. By hoarding every single major title on the call sheet, the filmmaker became completely untouchable. Nobody could fire the director because the director was also the producer signing the checks. Nobody could rewrite the script because the lead actor was the one typing the pages. Warren Beatty built a highly controlled environment of absolute authority. The film crew had no human resources department to call. The technicians had no studio boss to complain to. The entire production team was trapped in a completely isolated ecosystem ruled by one massive ego. The daily working environment under this regime was incredibly suffocating. The film crew actually gave their boss a highly offensive, sarcastic nickname behind his back. The camera operators, the lighting guys, and the grip department started calling the director Master Beatty. That specific nickname tells you everything you need to know about the vibe on that production. Working class professionals do not give a respected leader a name like that. The technicians on set realized very quickly that the movie was not about creating a great piece of cinema for the audience. The entire production was just a giant multi-million-dollar vanity project. The filmmaker was using studio money and the sweat of hundreds of workers just to satisfy his own massive vanity. The director did not care about the health or safety of the people building the sets or holding the microphones. To the leading man, the crew members were just disposable tools required to build a massive monument to his own greatness. You can measure the exact level of insanity on that set by looking at how the filmmaker treated the actual camera equipment. Making a movie in the late 1970s involved heavy mechanical film cameras. The gear was highly sensitive and the film stock was incredibly expensive. A standard professional director shoots a scene, yells cut, and lets the equipment cool down while the actors reset their marks. Warren Beatty completely refused to follow basic production protocols. The director forced the cast and crew to run the exact same scenes over and over again without ever calling cut. The filmmaker demanded endless takes, pushing the physical limits of everyone in the room. The demands were so relentless and the pace was so punishing that the heavy machinery literally started breaking down. 3 separate camera motors actually overheated and completely burned out during production. The electrical equipment physically melted because the director refused to stop filming. We have to look at the cold reality of that situation. If a Hollywood titan is willing to push expensive, heavy-duty mechanical equipment until it literally combusts just to satisfy a random creative impulse, the physical and mental toll on the actual human beings operating those machines must have been absolute torture. The director broke machines, and the director broke people. The absolute lowest point of this entire production involves a writer named Trevor Griffiths. This specific incident exposes the true, cold-blooded nature of the man running the set. Trevor Griffiths was a respected playwright hired to help write the script for Reds. Writing a movie is already a high-pressure job, but doing it under a boss who refuses to share control is a living nightmare. While the playwright was stuck on this grueling, stressful production, a massive personal tragedy occurred. Trevor received a phone call delivering the worst possible news a person can get. The writer's wife had just passed away. In any normal workplace, across any industry in the world, the response to that kind of news is universal. A boss immediately sends the grieving employee home to be with their family. Basic human empathy dictates that work stops when a life ends. Trevor Griffiths walked up to Warren Beatty, explained the horrific situation, and asked to leave the set to attend the funeral and mourn. The filmmaker did not offer a single ounce of sympathy. The director did not offer condolences. Instead, the leading man looked directly at the grieving husband and delivered a completely chilling response. Warren Beatty flat out refused the request. The Hollywood star told the writer that leaving the production was not an option. The exact justification the director used is terrifying. The filmmaker stated that signing a contract for the movie meant surrendering all personal rights to his life. We need to deeply analyze that specific sentence. A contract means handing over all personal rights. That is not a standard business agreement. That is a literal declaration of ownership. The director genuinely believed that paying someone a salary gave the studio the right to completely erase their basic humanity. The grieving husband was no longer a person with a family, a life, or human needs. The playwright was simply property belonging to the production. Warren Beatty looked at a man whose wife had just died and decided that finishing a movie script was vastly more important than basic human decency. The director weaponized a standard employment contract to trap a grieving man on a soundstage. The dictator at the top of the call sheet demanded total, unquestioning sacrifice from everyone around him. But the sacrifices only benefited one person. On a normal job, if a boss denies bereavement leave, the employee can contact a labor board or a union representative. The unions in Hollywood are supposed to protect workers from this exact type of exploitation. The power dynamic on the set of Reds, however, was completely warped. The director had far too much leverage. If a crew member complained about the endless hours, the lack of breaks, or the cruel demands, that crew member would be instantly blacklisted. The leading man had the power to ensure a technician never worked in the American film industry again. The crew was held hostage by their own need to pay rent and feed their families. The filmmaker knew this fact and ruthlessly exploited that financial desperation. The working-class people on the set had to stand there in silence, watching a millionaire actor throw tantrums and destroy equipment, knowing they had absolutely no power to stop the madness. Even the other actors on the call sheet were trapped. Usually, co-stars can band together to push back against a crazy director. When the director is also the lead actor standing right next to you in the scene, the pressure is constant. There is no safe space to retreat to between takes. The dictator controlled the schedule, the lighting, the dialogue, and the edit. Every single frame of the movie had to serve the ego of the man in charge. The production became a suffocating prison disguised as a glamorous Hollywood movie set. The American film industry loves to market these horrific stories as proof of a director's intense commitment to the craft. Entertainment journalists and film historians often write books praising this kind of extreme behavior. The media labels guys like Warren Beatty as perfectionists. The public needs to completely eradicate the word perfectionism from the Hollywood vocabulary. Calling a tyrant a perfectionist is just a cowardly public relations strategy used to excuse blatant workplace abuse. It is a convenient label that allows powerful executives to ignore the broken lives left behind on the studio lot. The Hollywood machine allowed this specific filmmaker to run a dictatorship because the studio executives only looked at the final box office numbers. The investors did not care if camera motors caught on fire. The executives did not care if a writer was forced to work through the death of a spouse. As long as the movie secured Academy Award nominations and generated a massive profit, the American studio system was perfectly happy to let a tyrant play God on the set. The art was celebrated, while the massive human toll required to make that art was completely hidden from the public. This level of unchecked power always demands a target, and the director eventually turned that exact same aggressive manipulation toward the leading lady of the film. That aggressive manipulation eventually found its ultimate target right in the center of the call sheet, focusing directly on the leading lady of the film. We have to look closely at Diane Keaton's specific situation because it completely breaks the usual Hollywood abuse pattern. Normally, an abusive producer targets unknown, financially desperate beginners. Diane Keaton was absolutely not an unknown beginner. The actress was already a massive, highly respected, Oscar-winning star with enormous box office power. The filmmaker could not use the standard intimidation tactics or threaten to ruin her career because her career was already fully established. The director needed a completely different, much more psychological angle to establish total dominance over his leading lady. The Hollywood star decided to use their real-life romantic relationship as a weapon. Mixing personal romance with a professional American film production is always a massive risk. When one partner holds the title of lead actor, lead producer, and director all at the same time, the power dynamic becomes completely toxic. There is absolutely no separation between the professional workplace and the private home. The romantic boyfriend is also the corporate boss signing the paychecks and controlling the daily schedule. The filmmaker used this exact lack of boundaries to execute a brutal psychological strategy right when the camera started rolling. The director specifically weaponized the fundamental concept of the film take. In a standard American movie production, a professional director asks for 3, 4, or maybe 5 takes to get the lighting, the camera movement, and the dialogue perfectly synced. If an actor is visibly struggling with a scene, a good director steps out from behind the camera, gives clear vocal instructions, and helps the performer find the right emotion. Warren Beatty completely abandoned all standard directing protocols. The filmmaker forced Diane Keaton to perform highly emotional, devastating crying scenes 40, 50, or even 60 times in a row. The director would not offer a single word of constructive feedback between the shots. The boss would just sit behind the camera monitor in absolute dead silence and demand another take from the exhausted actress. We need to thoroughly analyze the exact psychological toll of that specific repetition. When a human being performs a traumatic crying scene 50 consecutive times, the brain eventually loses the ability to tell the difference between fake scripted trauma and real physical exhaustion. The central nervous system completely breaks down under the heavy studio lights. The actor loses all basic confidence in their own professional abilities. By take number 30, the performer is completely confused, physically drained, and desperately looking for any sign of approval from the person in charge. That confusion was the exact goal. The director did not want a calculated professional acting performance crafted by a skilled artist. The dictator wanted to completely erase Diane Keaton's professional confidence. The filmmaker actively wanted to break a strong, highly independent woman down into a completely empty vessel, rendering her totally dependent on the director's ultimate approval. It was a systematic, calculated dismantling of a colleague's professional ego, executed right in front of a massive film crew. Breaking down her confidence with endless repetition was just the very first step of the manipulation. The most malicious and calculated tactic involved the actual movie screenplay. Warren Beatty knew exactly who Diane Keaton was in her private life. The actress held very strong modern feminist beliefs. The director, on the exact opposite side, operated with a very old-school, traditional, and highly chauvinistic mindset. Naturally, the couple had intense personal arguments about these exact political and social topics behind closed doors. Arguments about gender roles, personal independence, and mutual respect are common in many relationships. The filmmaker, however, committed a massive, unforgivable betrayal of romantic trust. The director secretly took the exact details of their private, intimate bedroom fights and wrote those specific arguments directly into the shooting script. Think about the absolute cold-blooded cruelty of that specific creative decision. The leading man forced his real-life girlfriend to stand on a brightly lit soundstage, surrounded by over 100 working crew members, and scream the exact same arguments they just had in their private home. The director intentionally pitted the actress's real-life feminist values directly against his own scripted on-screen chauvinism. The filmmaker completely erased the protective boundary between fictional movie characters and their actual living reality. When Diane Keaton was crying and yelling angrily on camera, Those were not fake emotions generated by a clever script. That was a real woman experiencing genuine real-time frustration with her actual real-life boyfriend. The director was intentionally triggering real-life anger, pushing her emotional buttons, and capturing that real-time trauma on expensive film stock. The filmmaker created a hostile environment where the leading lady could not defend herself, because defending herself just meant giving the director exactly what he wanted for the movie. Why would a person actively destroy their own romantic relationship just to shoot a movie scene? The answer exposes the absolute peak of Hollywood narcissism. The director wanted a visceral, explosive performance on the cinema screen, but the filmmaker absolutely refused to do the hard, collaborative work of actually directing an actor to get there naturally. It was much faster and much easier to just provoke real-life pain. The filmmaker willingly sacrificed the mental health and the emotional stability of a romantic partner just to secure good footage for the editing room. The Hollywood star completely consumed a real human connection to feed his own massive cinematic vanity project. The actress genuinely thought she was operating in a romantic partnership. The director just viewed the entire relationship as a convenient, disposable tool to extract raw material for a movie. The American film industry actually encourages and rewards this exact type of psychological abuse. Hollywood studios and mainstream entertainment critics have a massive, very unhealthy obsession with the concept of method acting. When a movie features an actor having a total mental breakdown on screen, the critics immediately label the film a raw masterpiece. The Academy Awards regularly hand out gold statues to directors who push their cast members to the absolute brink of psychological ruin. The industry looks entirely at the finished product and praises the intense emotion. Nobody in the entertainment press ever stops to investigate how the director actually extracted that specific emotion. Studio executives do not care if an actress was manipulated, physically exhausted, and emotionally terrorized for months on end. As long as the final performance looks good on a movie theater screen and generates millions of dollars in ticket sales, the industry completely validates the abuse. They label the abuser a visionary, uncompromising genius, instead of launching an investigation into the hostile work environment. This toxic culture of prioritizing the final product over human safety gave the filmmaker a complete free pass to torture his leading lady without facing a single consequence from the studio bosses. The ultimate, undeniable proof of this emotional theft came directly from the victim herself. Years after the movie wrapped and the awards were handed out, Diane Keaton gave an interview that completely recontextualized the entire production of Reds. The actress dropped a chilling, definitive statement about her award-winning work in the film. The actress stated clearly and directly, "That was really Warren's performance, not mine." We need to unpack the heavy, depressing reality behind that specific sentence. A professional actor takes massive pride in building a character from the ground up. To publicly admit that a highly praised performance did not actually belong to her is a devastating professional confession. The Oscar winner realized in hindsight that the director had completely bypassed her professional acting skills. The filmmaker bypassed her creative agency. The dictator simply pushed the right psychological buttons, triggered her real-life trauma, and recorded the resulting explosion on camera. The actress felt completely hollowed out by the process. The director did not guide a collaborative performance. The director hijacked her actual nervous system. That quote is the ultimate indictment of his entire directing style and his core personality. It proves beyond any doubt that the filmmaker did not see women as equal collaborators, respected artists, or even human beings with boundaries. The boss saw the leading lady as a highly reactive instrument. The director just kept hitting the instrument harder and harder, using their private life as leverage until it produced the exact sound he wanted for his movie. When a Hollywood legend uses love, trust, and intimate personal secrets purely to manipulate a colleague, the resulting film is not a beautiful romantic epic. It is a documented record of psychological imprisonment. We just watched a Hollywood dictator completely hijack a leading lady's emotional state, turning a professional movie set into a psychological prison. But this is exactly where the story takes a massive, unexpected turn. Warren Beatty genuinely thought those brutal directing tactics and those endless, exhausting takes were going to permanently break Diane Keaton. The filmmaker calculated that his romantic partner would simply crumble under the heavy studio lights and become a passive, obedient object for his movie. The director totally miscalculated who he was actually dealing with. Diane Keaton absolutely refused to play the tragic Hollywood victim. Look at the standard history of the American entertainment industry during that specific era. There are hundreds of depressing rumors and documented stories about young, talented women getting completely destroyed by toxic, powerful male directors. The studio system practically expected female stars to have a massive public breakdown after dealing with a known tyrant. Diane Keaton chose a completely different, highly empowering path. Instead of completely falling apart or letting the deep resentment destroy her own acting career, the actress actually took a step back and analyzed the entire hostile situation. Keaton started to see the dictator's mind games for what they actually were. The Oscar winner realized the boss was not some untouchable, mysterious cinematic genius. The leading man was just a deeply insecure control freak, throwing his weight around a sound stage because he was terrified of losing his grip on the production. Once a person actually sees the mechanics of the trap loses all its terrifying power. Diane Keaton stripped away his intimidating image simply by figuring out his pathetic psychological playbook. The most brilliant calculating move Diane Keaton made was exactly how she handled their private relationship in the public eye after the cameras stopped rolling. For years, the American entertainment press desperately wanted to paint Warren Beatty and Diane Keaton as this epic, legendary Hollywood romance. The gossip magazines wanted a dramatic, fiery love story to sell millions of copies. Keaton completely shut that entire media narrative down. When journalists eventually pressed the actress about the relationship details, she did not cry about a broken heart. The leading lady did not act like a devastated, scorned ex-girlfriend. Keaton coldly and directly stated that they were never a great romance. We really need to look at how completely devastating that specific statement is to a massive, fragile narcissist. Guys like the director absolutely need to believe they are the most important chapter in a woman's entire life. They thrive on the idea that their ex-partners are forever ruined by their absence. By publicly downgrading their highly publicized relationship to something minor, flawed, and ultimately unremarkable, the actress completely destroyed his ego. Keaton took the control right out of his hand and rewrote the history of their relationship on her own terms. The filmmaker thought he broke her heart, but the actress basically told the whole world the relationship was not even that big of a deal. That is exactly how you instantly neutralize an abuser's lingering power. But the ultimate victory happened right there on the actual movie set. The boss threw massive amounts of toxic energy, frustration, and psychological pressure at the actress, hoping to cause a total mental collapse for the cameras. Diane Keaton took every single ounce of that toxic pressure and completely weaponized it for her own benefit. The performer made a highly calculated professional decision to survive. Keaton grudgingly admitted years later that the intense, suffocating environment actually forced her to dig into raw acting resources she did not even know she possessed. Every time the director demanded another grueling, unnecessary take, the actress did not just cry out of defeat. Keaton took the real-life anger, the absolute physical exhaustion, and the deep, boiling resentment toward her boss, and shoved all of it directly into the fictional character. The raw frustration you see on the movie screen is completely real, but the actress actively channeled it to deliver an absolute masterclass in acting. The dictator thought he was breaking a woman down. In reality, the leading lady was using his toxic workplace behavior to elevate her own legendary career. The actress basically stole his psychological ammunition and fired it right back at the camera lens. When Reds finally hit the theaters and won multiple Academy Awards, the entire industry lined up to praise the director. But Diane Keaton knew the actual truth behind the scenes. The actress survived an absolute nightmare of a production and walked away with a brilliant piece of cinematic art attached to her own name. Keaton did not let the toxic director ruin the final product for her. The leading lady actually expressed deep, genuine pride in being a major part of that specific film. The actress successfully separated the abusive boyfriend from the permanent artwork. The filmmaker desperately wanted to be the controlling force pulling every single string on that set. Instead, the tyrant just ended up providing the exact friction Diane Keaton needed to secure her own historical Hollywood legacy. This is the ultimate story of American self-reliance. Diane Keaton looked a powerful, manipulative dictator right in the face, absorbed all the psychological hits, and used his own momentum to secure a massive personal victory. The actress proved that a toxic environment does not have to be a death sentence for a career. The abuser thought he was in total control of the narrative, but the intended victim actually walked away with the absolute upper hand. Diane Keaton fought her way out of that psychological trap, using her own raw talent and defiance. But the harsh reality is that no actor should ever have to wage a private, agonizing war for their own sanity on a movie set. The fact that she had to rely entirely on her own internal resilience exposes the most disturbing element of Warren Beatty's reign. He was never operating in a vacuum. A tyrant cannot maintain a sprawling dictatorship without a compliant, highly organized network of enablers actively protecting the behavior. We have to look closely at the American studio system during the 20th century to see how this network actually functioned. Back then, Mental manipulation and physical exploitation were not considered crimes by the industry elites. The studio executives actually viewed that dark behavior as a standard star privilege. If a filmmaker made millions of dollars at the box office, the executives handed that man a blank check to abuse the staff. Talent agents knew exactly what was happening in those late-night meetings at the Beverly Wilshire Hotel. The crew members on the set of Red saw the endless, punishing takes and the burnt-out camera motors. The publicists actively buried the dark rumors circulating around town. The entire industry formed a solid wall of protection around the abuser. They all prioritized their own paychecks, their exclusive party invitations, and their industry access over the basic safety of the performers. The power dynamic was completely rigged against the victims. An upcoming actor or a vulnerable beginner could not just walk off the set and complain to human resources. Human resources simply did not exist for them. If a performer complained about unwanted physical contact or extreme mental pressure, the studio did not investigate the powerful director. The studio simply fired the performer, labeled them difficult to work with, and blacklisted them from the American film industry forever. There are dark rumors that some talent managers actually fed their own clients directly to these powerful directors, knowing exactly what would happen just to secure future casting favors. The abuser held all the cards. The system was designed from the ground up to protect the moneymakers and completely silence the vulnerable targets. That is exactly how a guy like Warren Beatty survived for 5 decades without facing serious legal consequences. The complicity was built right into the Hollywood business model. That dark era of unchecked star privilege is finally collapsing. The American film industry was forced to change, heavily driven by modern labor rights movements, protecting artists in the workplace. We are finally seeing the rise of a completely new, incredibly vital role on movie sets today. I am talking about the intimacy coordinator. This specific job title is completely destroying the old Hollywood power structures and taking the absolute authority away from manipulative directors. We need to break down exactly how an intimacy coordinator operates because it is a fascinating and long overdue shift in the industry. Before this role existed, a director could just lock the doors, tell 2 actors to remove their clothing, and demand raw passion. The director could change the script on the fly and force physical contact right on the spot under the excuse of finding the right emotion. An intimacy coordinator stops that completely. They treat any intimate scene exactly like a highly dangerous, explosive action stunt. Before the cameras even turn on, the coordinator sits down with the actors and establishes strict, ironclad physical boundaries. They choreograph every single touch, every kiss, and every movement like a strict routine. Nothing is left to chance, and nothing is unscripted. This protocol is not just about physical safety. It is about psychological care and legal protection. The intimacy coordinator acts as a strict physical barrier between the performer and the director. If a filmmaker suddenly demands a more explicit scene, tries to cross the agreed-upon boundaries, or uses intimidation tactics, the coordinator immediately steps in and shuts the entire production down. The coordinator holds the legal power to stop the cameras from rolling. The power imbalance is completely neutralized. The actor no longer has to fight the wealthy studio boss alone. The coordinator ensures the performer can easily separate themselves from the character, leave the trauma on the set, and go home safely. Apply this modern standard directly to the historical timeline we just discussed. If an intimacy coordinator existed during the 1970s, the entire playbook of manipulation gets destroyed instantly. The midnight casting calls at the Beverly Wilshire Hotel would never happen. A professional coordinator would immediately flag those private room meetings as a massive legal liability. The auditions would be forced into a brightly lit public studio office during standard daytime working hours, with union representatives sitting right in the room. The concept of the gray area would be entirely eliminated. On the actual movie set, the director's mind games would be cut off at the root. If the filmmaker tried to force a vulnerable performer into an unscripted extreme physical scene just to test their boundaries, the coordinator would intervene immediately. The acting exercise excuse would not work. The coordinator would demand a written script and clear prior consent for every single movement. When the boss tried to torture his leading lady with 50 consecutive crying takes, intentionally triggering real-life personal arguments, a modern set representative would call it out as severe workplace harassment. The production would be halted, the crew would walk off the set, and the studio would face a massive, highly publicized labor lawsuit. The American entertainment industry spent a century letting powerful men hide their crimes behind the word art. They used the illusion of cinematic genius to justify the absolute destruction of their colleagues and partners. The introduction of these strict labor protections proves that the old system was never about making great movies. It was always about protecting abusers and maintaining a toxic hierarchy. The modern film set is finally tearing down those outdated power structures, ensuring that nobody ever has to hand over their personal life, their dignity, or their physical safety just to sign a movie contract again. The era of the untouchable Hollywood dictator is over, and the industry is finally forcing these guys to play by the rules. The implementation of those modern set protections proves that the industry finally caught up to the abuser. When you look at Warren Beatty in his later years, you see a very fitting, very public sentence being served by the audience. The Hollywood establishment spent decades trying to build a permanent, shiny monument to his name. The media desperately wanted history to remember the leading man as a visionary artistic pioneer who pushed the boundaries of American cinema. But the public finally woke up, and that glamorous playboy image collapsed completely under the weight of the actual facts. The modern era simply does not tolerate the Mr. Hollywood myth anymore. Today, the cinematic legacy of this formerly untouchable star is completely overshadowed by a very dark, undeniable history. Nobody talks about the brilliant camera angles or the groundbreaking scripts anymore. The entire conversation surrounding his filmography is permanently stained by the undeniable reality of physical exploitation and severe mental abuse. When you strip away the expensive tailored suits, the studio PR spin, and the Academy Awards, the truth is incredibly pathetic. Charm is a great social tool, but when a powerful celebrity specifically uses that charm to strip vulnerable people of their personal autonomy, it ceases to be romance. It is simply a cowardly, pathetic crime executed by a man hiding behind his own fame. The era of these Hollywood hypocrites is officially closed. The American film industry is finally learning a very hard, very public lesson right now. Studio executives are realizing that absolute power and massive budgets might produce classic movies, but all that box office money can never buy forgiveness for the crimes committed behind the closed doors of a hotel suite. The public simply refuses to separate the art from the abuse anymore. We are completely done handing out free passes to tyrants just because they look good on a movie theater poster. The untouchable system that aggressively protected predators for 50 years is finally rotting away, leaving behind nothing but the cold, hard truth. When the director yells cut, the cameras stop rolling, but the trauma for these actresses does not. What we have just seen is proof of a toxic power dynamic, where art becomes a shield for abuse and silence is bought with fame. It is time for the truth to be heard. What are your thoughts on this dark reality? Leave a comment below. Don't forget to subscribe to Actor Secrets as we continue to expose the dark side of Hollywood. Thanks for watching.